before continuing, I'd like to pass it over to Shanette to talk about the case that OCAD and other organizations in Illinois were fighting recently, and to talk about what happened and what was the result. Yes. And I'd like to report that, we've got Cesar with us. So I want to talk a little bit about his story.
Para OCAD, pues nos hemos estado organizando desde el 2000.
So for OCAD, we've been organizing since 2013. And so we know a little bit about what it's been like to fight under Obama and then Trump. And, the first case that we went publicly to go, to demand his liberty was Cesar's. And so...
Rojos, racistas, ¿verdad? Ahí viven. McHenry.
Cesar was detained in McHenry, which is a very racist county, and we're going to be talking about Cesar's case because his family was fighting, for this jail to close, and was involving, their own neighbors. So a few weeks before we learned about Cesar, the family, his family actually went and testified about the conditions inside the detention center. So by that time, he already was in detention for 20 months. And he was detained in September of 2019, an arrest due to the fact that he was selling used cars without knowing that he needed a license for that. And that caused him to be transferred to ICE. We went and got to know the family a little bit, and we saw that there was a lot of energy. We were worried a little bit at first because, we knew that he had 2 felonies and he had been deported 20 years ago. And so we thought, after Trump, we knew that it was going to be very difficult. But we saw that there was energy in his family, in the community, that there were other organizations like ICER that were also deciding to fight. And so we decided to explore this. Cesar had entered the United States when he was young, when he was just 13 years old. And when he was very young, there in Crystal Lake, which is another town, which is also close to McHenry, when he was very young, they had arrested him for 2 felonies. And I want to give a little bit of context, just to talk a little bit about the diverse ways in which they criminalize us, right? When Cesar was young, he worked in a Walmart, and they put charges on him for selling things at a lower price to his friends. That was one of the felonies. The second felony was that he was working outside of the buildings, painting, and in that super racist place, 2 people came up to him, 2 white people, and they started to harass him. And in that, he defended himself, and he hurt one of them. So that was the second felony, and that was the reason that he was deported 20 years ago. Nevertheless, he returned, and there you can see his family, his spouse, and he made a family, right? Today, we know Cesar as the father of 5 kids. The oldest is 19 or 18, and the youngest is 5 years old, right? So 2 months just for that. They said that he couldn't get out and be able to fight his case from outside, and that's when we heard that Mayorkas and ICE were considering the rules of who is considered a priority. And we said, here, we're going to push, because let's try to expand and challenge them, that no one is disposable, right? Yes, Cesar has 2 felonies. Yes, they've accused him of being a gang member, but nevertheless, he deserves to be with his family, and his children deserve to have the love of their father, right? And so, we decided to go in on that. And, a few weeks later, Cesar was freed after a hard campaign and everything. He's still wearing an ankle monitor, and he's still in supervision. So, of course, the fight continues. We don't have him completely free, but that's where we're at with Cesar. Thank you so much. for telling us all of that, Shanat. And, congratulations to you and Cesar and everybody else who participated in that fight for him to come out. I remember when we first started talking about this case, and it was like, can we do this? Can we not do this? And it was like, okay, well, the worst fight is the one that we never take on, right? And that's what we're seeing, is that there are cases where in other circumstances we might have thought would never been possible, but if we continue pushing now, we can see different results. And so thank you so much for your fight and for being able to share all of that with us. Now we're going to pass it on to Tanya so that you can explain a little bit more about the cases that you guys have been working on and fighting on, and precisely that you'll tell us a little more details about why you're so confused with this administration, because I think what we're seeing is that they're not consistent, right? And when we're seeing victories like the ones that we see in Shanat's case, we also see cases in which these same situations are not, you know, uh, producing the same results, even though it's similar conditions. So can you tell us more about that? Yes, of course.
Bueno, yo
Thank
soy
you, Jacinta.
parte de una...
So I'm part of a coalition of organizers, activists, individuals that are organizing in the states of New York and New Jersey, and we have the mission of closing detention centers in those two states, and a lot of people are involved. There's people who help in the legal space, there's people who help with bonds, and then there's people who help to work with people inside of those detention centers. Um, and there's also people who organize protests outside and talking with the media. And one of the cases that's very personal for me is that I spoke with Chris. You guys can see him here on the screen, Chris Pardesi. He's from Trinidad, and
Vino aquí desde pequeñito.
he came here as a very young person, and he had criminal charges, um, from the police here in New York. And as we know, the criminal system is not just, especially for certain communities. And so he's a victim of that, of those circumstances that happened. And well, we tried to talk with his congressman, and maybe they were thinking that, living in a super immigrant heavy place, that his congressperson would be attentive, but no, he didn't want to be involved with the case. And the reason was because he has criminal charges. And so I spoke with him every week for months and months, and we're calling every week for his case to ICE. Every person that we can call, we actually got the cell phones of these agents at ICE, and we're calling them over his case. And well, other tactics that we did was protests outside of the detention center, and he was also a part of a group of people that were transferred to Hudson County, New Jersey, from other states, and he was transferred to LaSalle in Louisiana, in Jena, Louisiana. And what happened with him, it was that we thought that with all of the pressure that happened, and the last thing was his health. His health was extremely bad, and he needed an operation that would have been very expensive for ICE. And so we thought that the reason that they let him out of detention, out of every individual, yes, due to all the protests and all of the calls, but also because ICE didn't want to have to pay for his operation. And that was, a good case. They brought him back to New York, and now he's fighting with us to liberate more people.
Entonces,
and in the second case that I want to talk about quickly is Marvin's case. If we can go to the next slide.
Okay, Marvin.
Marvin Reyes Ventura is a very difficult case that we've been trying to do everything we can, and they're not letting him come out. And I want to make it very clear that ICE has the option to allow him to be released, but they're not doing it. And in this moment, Marvin is on his 123rd day of hunger strike. And so 123 days of not eating.
Ahorita él está tomando.
And right now he's taking liquids. But this weekend, that passed, he got mad and he was in a very bad state, and he stopped in taking liquids. And right now, the detention center wants to. Now he's asking permission, or the detention center is asking for permission to force feed him, and that's a violation of his human rights. But we know that for ICE, it doesn't matter. They just want these people to continue having them in detention for reasons of money, and also to push people
por en sí mismos.
to accept their own deportations, to self-deport. But he doesn't want to do that. He's going to continue fighting. And he is a leader, one of the leaders of Bergen County, where he was. Now he's in Chrome. Now he's in Chrome in Florida. So from there, we're going to share a link for people who want to participate in the campaign with Marvin, and we're going to keep fighting for his case. But he's a leader, and he's somebody who's extremely brave. And if you want to be involved with his campaign, we're going to share a link right now. Thank you, Tanya, for sharing all of that information. And thank you for sharing the link. So now here's where we're really going to put our words into action, and we can actually do something for one of our compañeros. So we know that within DHS, they already know about Marvin's case. We've been putting on a lot of pressure. We've been bringing him up in conversations. And so I just want to implore everybody to please participate in putting pressure on the administration, because we think that we can get results, especially if they see that there is an even stronger response. So again, Tanya, thank you so much for sharing the victories, and all the folks who are outside. To please to see what we can do to support Marvin's case, and especially because he's been on hunger strike for so many days, which is something so difficult and so impactful. So now we're going to Contra Costa in California, or other places. But if you want to just share with us a little bit, Carlos, about the 11 folks at Yuba. Now there's 6, before they were 11. So what was happening, and what's your relation to all of them? And yeah, how is the fight there with them? Yes, thank you all so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, the Coalition of Free the Yuba 11. Now there's 6 of them. It's a very difficult fight because it's concentrated in one county, which is the county of Yuba, and it's in Marysville, California. It's a county that is extremely conservative, and it's a county that receives the money that ICE gives it, and they have a contract that it doesn't finish until 2099. It's incredible to say that, but it's until 2099. And so I want to share with you all the story of 3 of our leaders. And I'm going to also share a little bit about how this is connected with myself. And then I'm going to pass it to my friend Esperanza so that she can also speak about the other leaders, brothers that we have. Sadly, they are locked up and caged in a county that is a jail, where the situation is extremely inhumane, the treatment that they're receiving. So we're going to start with Freddy. Freddy has been detained for approximately 2 years. He has a small daughter who gets very little visitation during this time because it's very difficult to be able to get to Yuba County. Freddy worked as a cook, helping his family to get ahead in a restaurant that his family opened. It's very important to say that a lot of the community comes to that restaurant, and when they see Freddy's family, they see the sadness that And many of them don't know that that sadness comes from the fact that Freddy, one of the cooks, is now detained in Yuba County. In detention, Freddy continues to practice his culinary abilities and prepares food for his friends there at Yuba. And that's the way that he maintains himself active and positive in this fight, which has already been for more than 2 years. The next case is Ricardo. Ricardo has 46 years. He's 46 years old, and he's lived in the area of La Bahia since 1999. He has a son who has just graduated from high school, and Ricardo had a bond hearing, which was really sad for us because it just happened this last week. And despite the fact that he really demonstrated his rehabilitation and the way that he's really used his time productively, and also the support of the community, which is what has brought us here today, because it's really beautiful to see how the community unifies and shows ICE and the judges and the system that our leaders and our brothers are not alone. On that day, they got a ton of people together showing that they supported him, and even that way the judge simply closed the door, saying that he was not going to give him a bond and that he would stay detained. So that was actually very sad for us, because we had hoped that after all of the things that Ricardo showed and his lawyers demonstrated, and that everything seemed to be going perfectly, the judge simply closed the door and said, here, there's nothing to do. You're going to continue being detained, and close that door. The next case that we're going to be speaking on is Luis. Luis was the principal caretaker of his mother. We want to start with that. He's a person who, even though he was the primary caretaker of his mother, who was diagnosed with cancer, for stage 4 cancer, and we all know how difficult those battles with cancer are. And Luis was the only person and the primary caretaker for his mom. And Luis completed, the firefighter program in California. And last year and in the years that have passed, Luis was one of the people who was battling to save a lot of the houses and schools and different areas in California. He was one of those firefighters who participated, risking his own life to be able to maintain the community safe. And Luis is also a carpenter and a commercial fisher. These are the 3 stories that I wanted to share with you before passing it on to my compañera Esperanza. And the 4th one that I'm going to share with you all is the same one that's here present, and that's me. So my name is Carlos Sauceda, and I was detained for 2 years fighting my case. And these members that I've spoken about, all of us have an active case, which is still pending in the courts. In my case, it started in 2017, and we're now in 2021, and we're still waiting for a response. Sadly, I won my case, not just once, but 2 times. I won in front of the judge, and then I won also in the Ninth Circuit. And even with that, ICE and the system decided that they didn't want to release me, that they weren't going to release me, and they decided that they were going to maintain me in custody for the time that they had decided was necessary. In that moment, I had already been detained for 2 years, and it was extremely sad for me, the pain of all of my family who lives in the US, to see their sadness and their tears. Even though I had won my case 2 times, even with that, they said, no, we're not going to let you out of detention. They abused their power, and they didn't let me out. And it was so much pressure that I started to get sick. I had high blood pressure, which is something strange because I'm a very healthy person normally. But this was the strategy that they use as ICE. They push you into a corner until you suffocate you. And I couldn't resist anymore. And I decided to leave because I felt like I was either going to die inside, or I was going to try and have an opportunity, despite the fact that where I am right now is not secure for me, but I didn't want to die inside. And so that's my story, and my case is still pending. I've already won twice, and the abuse continues, first from the Trump administration and now from this administration. So as leaders, we're fighting, And we're asking for all of you, we're begging that, just like in my case, it's much more difficult for all of our friends who are still detained. And it's only 6 of them now, and ICE has the power to, with one signature on the paper, to let them out at all of them, to all of them. But instead, they're simply ignoring that they're human beings, people who are there inside. So thank you for your time. And I'm going to pass it on now to my friend Esperanza, who's going to talk about the other members that we have detained. Thank you so much, Carlos. Keeping on with the next 3 people who are still detained right now in Yuba, we're going to start with Minor. Minor is a young person, 22 years old. He speaks Spanish and Quiche, and he came into the U.S. when he was 16 years old after his brother was murdered in Guatemala. The government, regardless, has denied his bond and discretion to be able to leave detention and reunite with his mother. He's been in detention for 3 years because Carlos insists that Minor is a member of a gang, and because of that, they continue to detain him. Then we have the case of Leonel. Leonel migrated to the U.S. When he was young, and Leonel, when he was detained, also became part of the Leonel is also a mechanic, and he'd like to go back to school when he's liberated so that he can also improve his English and also work on hybrid cars, because one of his jobs is being a mechanic. And last but not least, we have the case of Juvenal. Don Juve, or Mr. Juve is how we call him in the community. He's a dad and a grandfather, 58 years old, and he's been in Yuba County for almost 4 years. Don Juve and his legal team have gotten in touch with the DA of San Bernardino to ask Jason Anderson to reduce his conviction or cancel his conviction from 2016. And even a judge from the same county is in agreement with this, and the DA could really do this. But Anderson has said that he won't take away the charge. And because of that, we're continuing to make these calls, because that's what could prevent Juvenal's deportation. We need to keep putting pressure on this DA, because now he has the opportunity, and we do too, right, to pressure to prevent one more deportation. Because just like the other friends from the panel have mentioned, sometimes a tactic works, sometimes it doesn't. And, in these cases, we've been reducing the amount of people that have been detained, because some of them have been liberated and others of them have been forced to accept their deportations, to not continue suffering in the conditions in these jails. And so that's why we're inviting all of you who are here present to take action and to please help to call DA Anderson to take action to reduce the conviction and to prevent the deportation of Don Juve.
Muchísimas gracias, Carlos, Esperanza, por compartir todo eso. A mí también me ha inspirado mucho.
Oh, thank you so much, Carlos and Esperanza, for all of that. It also super inspires me to be able to see how you've done everything in a collective way. So you're doing it case by case, but you're also thinking about every single person who's still detained at that detention center and the type of solidarity you can have between each other. So thank you all so much for your beautiful work and for showing us in this way. And, precisely to be able to start talking about those tactics, we know that the stories that are super impactful that we've heard today, there are thousands of super impactful stories like that, right? Like all of the people who are caged, who are detained, have stories of fight back, of resistance, of why they're in that situation. But a lot of it has to do with who has, we're going to use their same language, who has their gang, right? Who has their squad behind them, who has organizing behind them. And we know that when we do a campaign, we have lots of different tactics that we can use. So now we're going to start a little bit in this way to share a little bit about what are some of the tactics, what are the strategies, what are the types of events that have worked for us, right? We've had some of the success, and what are some of the strategies that work to be able to target ICE, and some of the strategies that you've explained, Esperanza, right, of other targets like the DA in this case, to also ask them to do something. There's other things that we also do for our communities. So let's start with you, Carlos. What are some of the tactics or strategies that you all have used in your organizing work that you think would be important to share with all of us today? Thank you so much. So we're going to start 4 of our tactics. I'll do 2, and then Esperanza is going to do some more. I'm going to talk about the importance of the support from the community. A lot of people say, what it's going to do if I do a call, if I do a protest, maybe nobody's going to hear me, no one is going to care, and because of that, they don't support, and they don't realize that it's actually really important, the support from the community. So now I shared with all of you, packing the courts virtually. The judges sometimes are so surprised by the way that the community is supporting. That has a huge impact because it shows that the community also supports our leaders. And personally, I want to say that when we were in the Yuba County jail, we felt alone in the aspect that nobody knew that we were there. And it was very difficult because a lot of our families live in the south of California, and we were detained in the north, and we didn't have support. In that time, because of the situations that were happening in terms of not having hygiene, treating us very badly, they had us, around 21 hours per day in a single cell. They didn't want to give us any soap, which is the most basic thing to be able to wash our hands. So we decided to do hunger strikes. And we started hunger strikes of 12 people, which didn't have a lot of impact. And then we started to have, the next one was 20 people. And the third one, which, we decided to do because we were having problems when it came to medical conditions. There was a lot of people who had broken fingers and would put in appointments to see the doctor, and those would be ignored, saying that ICE didn't want to pay, ICE didn't care about that. There were people who had mental health issues. They also wouldn't get any sort of medical attention. But there was a very specific case of a man who had cancer, and he had a lot of pain, and he would often request medical visits, and they would often ignore them. And so we would decided to do a hunger strike with a lot of people, about 60 people. And what was interesting about this was that we were able to get to know people outside of the detention center who also united with us during that hunger strike. And that's when retaliation came from ICE, which was that we need to move Carlos from this place, and we're going to move him we're going to isolate him. We're going to just get him out of the state where not even his family is going to know where he is or where his lawyer is going to be able to find him. And those are the tactics that ICE uses when a person decides to raise their voice. So imagine what would have happened to me, because in that moment the guards came and they said, "Let's go." I said, "Where are we going?" And their answer was, "Do you think that it's hot in California?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, you're going to see when you get to Louisiana the type of heat that there is there." So they thought that they were going to move me from one coast to a different coast. And if it was difficult for my family to be able to get to Yuba, which is like 8 hours from where we live in California, can you imagine the impact that it would be on my family to, have that transfer go through? And not only that, changing courts, maybe my lawyer wouldn't be able to get there anymore. Thanks to the support from the community, this is where it's so important what's needed in this moment, which is why we're asking for all of you to please be part of the organizations and to support us. In the moment that they were going to move me, one of the people who was still there, he informed the community, and they said they're moving Carlos out of the state. And a waterfall of calls hit ICE and their San Francisco office, Stockton, and Sacramento. And they it drove them crazy. So when I got to Stockton, lieutenant got me and he put me against the wall and he said, right now you're going to get on the phone and you're going to tell all of these people to stop bothering us because they want to go to the media and they want to talk about this. And I said, I'm not going to do anything until you guys tell me where I'm going to go. And he said, we're not going to tell you, but right now you're going to get on a phone and you're going to, and if not, we're going to make you suffer a lot more. And I understood that fighting back was important. I said, do what you want to do. So thanks to what happened with the support from the community, they didn't move me from the state. They actually brought me to Mesa Verde, which is a different detention center. And once I was there, the agents were already waiting for me with a telephone in their hand saying, tell people that you're here and that we're not moving you to another state. So that's the importance of the support of all of you and all of the people and calling and mobilizing. You know, the ICE offices and this administration don't want attention on this sort of thing. And so it's very, very important to be supporting in this way. The second thing, the second tactic that we use is sharing the stories of our leaders. And that's something that we did during a virtual vigil, which really made us happy because more than 60 people came. But also something that's even more beautiful about this is that all the people that are in our organizations, we try to say that we're fighting for the leaders who are inside and for their family members who are also suffering. And so in that vigil, we were able to reunite. We were able to do the opposite of what ICE and the system does of separating us, and we were able to reunite the families where there were tears and moments of emotion. And one of our leaders inside said, just because of that, I felt free in that moment. So it's super important, the support from the community. And now I'm going to pass it to my compañera Esperanza, who's going to talk about the other tactics. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carlos. So, talking about the vigils, another tactic that we use in the month of June, in the last day of May, was that we did an in-person vigil. Because we knew that restrictions were starting to become less strict. And so as you can see on the screen, this is a photo of the group of people, one of the groups of people that came with us on that date. And one of the goals was to create, consciousness raising around what's going on in this jail and against the abuses, the spending of resources to continue to detain 6 people in this county. We also, part of our intention was to create a network of support for the families so that they could see physically the amount of people that are out there supporting. And in this in-person vigil, we were also able to bring together the families of the 6 people who were still detained at that time so that they could come with us and not only have a moral support, but also the support needed to continue fighting. And together with this group of people, it was very important that we come to this community because one of our challenge has been finding local groups to be part of the campaign as well, so that we can come to the Committee of Supervisors, which is one of the agencies that is able to actually put an end to this contract. So that's another reason why it was really important to come out and to take this action of protesting in community. And another reason is because the county of Yuba is the only county in California that still has a contract with ICE. The rest of the detention centers are operated by private companies like Geo in California. Another tactic that we've also been using is called Cafeteando con los Once, which is something that happens every Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. and we do a live while we're drinking coffee. We're also talking with people from the campaign and people who are inside and detained inside, and to talk about the importance of the absolute liberty of the immigrant community. So it's really important that we continue to have these conversations and the patterns around the tactics that are used to detain our community and to also share calls to action and how people can join the fight and fight alongside us. So another thing that we've used these conversations for on this platform has been to create visibility. and especially of the people who are still detained and also in our movement. Because once somebody is in a detention center, it's, this type of institutions, they try to erase the identities of our people and our community. They try to take away their name, they try to take away their face, and they only refer to them as an A number or as bodies. And so here we actually give, again, the humanity that each person deserves, just like we've done it with you all today, sharing each of their stories from the people who are still detained. Thank you. And I pass it back to you, Jacinta. Thank you so much, Esperanza. And thank you so much, Carlos, for sharing all of that. And, we're seeing a lot of different organizing tactics that are super valuable, but I just want to summarize some of the points that you mentioned. The first thing is that, what you mentioned, Carlos, is this situation with retaliation, right? And I think that one of the things that constantly we need to be monitoring is that when we organize, the ICE is also going to have, their own response. They're not just going to stay quiet there in the corner, but they're also going to be retaliating against people who are detained, people who are outside, people who are going to ICE check-ins. We know that many times they use surveillance against organizations. And so we need to always be thinking about that, not always just because we're thinking that we're not going to do things, but we also need to be thinking about what's going to be their reaction and be very clear how we're going to protect ourselves. But I think another thing that's important is that oftentimes our final demand is always demanding that they release the person, right? But there's also things that we can do to organize to stop transfers, right, to other jails, or to at least give ourselves a little more time to delay a deportation. And so hearing your victory in California to be able to stop that, Carlos, because we know that a lot of people are sent to Louisiana because they have so many detention centers there. But now I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more, Tanya, for you all in New York and New Jersey, what are some of the strategies that you've used and what are some of the things that you've done to prevent these transfers? Yes, that's a very good question. Because, we have campaigns to be able to close the detention centers in these two states, and we've made so much noise. There's a law that is going to pass in New Jersey, and we already have a law proposed in New York to be able to cut the contracts with ICE. So, for that same reason, and because ICE can really change, move people at any time. But there are some detention centers.
Sacando a gente de esos centros de detenciones. Y les están transfiriendo a otros.
And they're transferring them to other detention centers throughout the country. So for us, it's very important, one, to be able to finish with the transfers, and instead people at ICE need to actually release the people who are currently detained, not just transfer them. And so our demand is to release people, not transfer them, but at the same time to be able to close the detention centers. And one of the tactics that we've used is, one, working with lawyers and the people who represent those people in detention centers, and if they don't have lawyers, trying to help them in our own way to put together documents in whatever way we can, and helping them to do it pro se or for themselves. And we also help people to submit complaints against ICE, whether it's violations, medical violations, or violations that are happening in the detention centers around their human rights. So that's another way that we will try to help them. And finally, we also try to get the attention of politicians, especially Senator Booker, Senator Menendez. In this moment, maybe you all think that because they're Democrats and because they're liberal and because they're good people and all this, that they're going to do what we all need. But no, they told us that in this moment, we're going to be quiet, and we're not going to support. And we can't accept that. And so we're going to continue doing actions in front of their offices, inside their offices, calling attention to, in whatever way we can, so that they'll actually call ICE and tell them to stop the transfers of people, and to actually release people who are still detained in these detention centers. And another tactic that we've used before to, one is really stay in contact with people who are actually in these detention centers. Like you all heard from Carlos, people inside take care of one another, right? They take care of each other, and they tell us, this person left, this person, they transferred them to another place. We've seen that people get transferred to Virginia and then to Louisiana, and then this person was deported. So they're the ones who actually report. It's not that I or somebody else know what's going inside. They are the ones. Everything depends on the relationship that we have with people inside, and really emphasizing their messages and what they want to share with the public and with the community. And they've put their bodies on the line with hunger strikes, and that's something very serious. Like Jacinta said, that's extremely serious. And so we need to also organize the media to listen to them, and in whatever way we can, so that people will understand that people are really being impacted in a serious way inside, and that the situation is very serious, and to be able to do something, or to have to do something like this, like a hunger strike. Another tactic is that we'll do protests outside, and there are so many groups, and thanks to all of those groups in our coalition, we've been able to have people there almost every day in front of the detention centers. So with all of that pressure and what's happening there, we actually are really getting some attention to more people, and little by little, right? Because everything is a process. It's not going to happen from one day to the next, and we're not going to have results from one day to the next. But we're seeing that, under the Biden administration, we're not going to be able to push them until we organize ourselves and have more people. And even leaders in DHS, leadership within the agency, have told us, you guys need to push us. You guys need to push us to do what what you want us to do. It's their words, right? So what do we need to do? We need to keep organizing. We need to keep pushing in whatever way we can. But the most important thing that I can say is that maintaining the communication with the people inside, so that their words are really the ones that reverberate throughout the community.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And yes, I think that that last point is super important, because exactly this work needs to be done, and who are actually led by the people who are fighting against their own deportations. So in the last few minutes that we've got, I'm going to pass it on to Shanat to tell us a little bit about, in particular with these last few weeks, what, y'all have been doing there in Chicago. But I also want to say that we're getting to time, and we're going to do like a closing soon. But if there are people who have questions, because we didn't really have time for the Q&A session, or if you want to share about the cases that you all are working on, some of us are going to stay on so a little past the time, so that we can continue chatting with people. But for the moment, Shanat, please tell us, your secrets at OCAD. I just want to echo what a lot of people have already said, in terms of making noise, in terms of making it collective and pressuring ICE. When we got into the fight with Cesar, that week where we put in the documents, turned in the request to the ICE director here in Chicago, Lucero, to use his discretion to release Cesar, we found out that Mayorkas was going to be visiting Chicago, and that he was going to, here in Chicago, we've got headquarters in ICE, which determines, the situation around 6 different states around us. And we figured out that he was going to be visiting Director Lucero here in Chicago. And so we went downtown and we made a lot of noise, and we brought the media and had a press conference. And there we made it super clear to them that, we had left the request on Lucero's desk 2 days before, and that we're still waiting. We're waiting on that new prosecutorial discretion memo, and that we need to free our people like Cesar, people who, regardless of whether, they've had felonies, and I repeat it because, the administration likes to prioritize people who have had interactions with the police for deportation, and in that way they want to treat us as though we're disposable. So I think it's really important to find those strategic moments and to really use them and go hard. So identifying what's happening right now and making the most noise that we can so that they can also feel that pressure.
Muchísimas.
Thank you so much, Shanat. And I think now, yes, nobody's escaped, right? So whether it's the director of DHS, or the ICE agent who's trying to transfer someone, or the congressman who isn't wanting to take action, there's always somebody who we should be pressuring to do a little more, and who can be our target in this moment, so that they can make the right decision. And depending on who that person is, our tactics are going to be changing. But thank you so much to all of the organizers who participated today. And something that's also extremely important to consider is that sometimes we'll build power talking with our own community, and sometimes it's actually landing punches. So we need to think about the different types of work that we do. And thank you so much for telling us so many beautiful stories about your fights, and sharing different examples and of the cases that we're seeing right now. And just because a case has ended in a deportation, that doesn't mean that there's that's the end of the fight. There's still so many ways to stay connected and keep fighting for everybody. So we still have a few more weeks to be able to pressure this administration so that their rules, the PD memo, and how they should be using their discretion when they're doing actions, when they're doing arrests, when they're detaining people, when they're deporting people. Now we've got the clock on us, and we've just got a few more weeks to be making this intervention. So now is the moment to really get involved in making noise about these cases. And, if a new memo comes out that doesn't support and doesn't free the people that we're talking about, it really doesn't help us at all. And so if you want to understand more about the fight that's happening right now, please get in touch with us. We're going to keep fighting these deportation cases. And now we're going to stay a little bit longer so that we can do questions and answers. But we're going to continue pushing until we have a memo that is actually going to treat us with dignity, where they're not going to be using any interaction with the police as a foundation for deportation, and that is really going to give us an opportunity to fight for the maximum liberation of as many people as possible. So thank you all so much, everybody, for sharing with us today. Thank you for being part of this fight. We're going to continue being here. And if you'd like to continue being part of the conversation, we'll be here. But for now, goodbye to all those people who had to leave.